Welcome to a new tutorial of ColdFusion. In this tutorial we're going to talk about loops and lists. And of course we have a presentation for this. ColdFusion tutorial number 3, loops and lists. What do you use a loop for? Loops let us go through a number of loops or until a condition has been met. Loops, yeah. What are loops? Loops are essentially an iteration of a number of things that have to be done a number of times. Loops can also put stuff on screen for an X amount of time. Loops can display everything within a list, an array, a struct or a component, I think it was called, a query and a file. We're not going too much into these things, but arrays and lists are different types of ways to store information, as well as structs. We will definitely go into structs at some point, because that is a very good way to store sessions. Queries is for next tutorial, and files we could, I think it will also later look into a file, but essentially there in a file you can go through a text file, for example, and go through every line of the text file. Loops can also be used to perform other actions a certain amount of times over the length of a number, query, list, array, struct or file. And what do I use it for? Well, I use it actually for displaying images in rows and columns, which I use both cfoutput for this, and because cfoutput can also output queries, which we'll learn next tutorial. But you can output then per loop and per output. Because normally when you would output a query, it would just go. If you would put it over a table, you would have a long list of photos, for example. But if you want to have it nicely, like in an album, like have photos next to each other, like 3 or 4 in a row, then you need to, or 3 or 4 in a column, rather. Rows is like this, and columns is like that, horizontal. So if you want to have it in multiple columns, you would have to use some techniques, which is in this case a loop, to output it in that way. And that I can actually show today, but I'm not going to use a query for it because that is next lesson, so we will use lists for it, which is the other part we have to talk about still. You can also use it for updating updating data in a database table for a certain amount of times actions. If I would have a form with multiple similar fields, like storing several files for a record, I could have a loop to use, a loop for iterating through all of the files that are being uploaded and storing every file in their own record in a database. You can also output several rows in the database table, although this is what you usually use cfoutput for, but yeah, it is an option. And you can output information from a file, which I mentioned earlier. You can actually have a text file or something, or a comma separated file, and then go through all of the rows in the file. So how to perform the loop in ColdFusion? You have the tag cfloop. It takes a couple of attributes. You can in the most simplest form, when you're just gonna go iterate from 1 to 5, for example, use the from and to. From is on 1 and 2 is on 5, for example. Index is to be able to know which step you're at the moment, so you can read it out or use it for functions. And step is then with how much it should increment each time. For example, +1 or +2. And file uses a delimiter, usually because of the way you want to look into the file, whether it's hard returns, which is a character code, I think character 9 or 11, Or, for example, even comma separated file would of course be a comma. In queries you can use a start row and index again to know which row you're on, and start row is like where you want to start. For example, if I want to have only the last 5 records, if I want to have a certain number or a certain type of rows from the query, I could start at a different row in the query table. Arrays, I've also indexed an item again. I'm not going to go too far into that. Arrays are a bit complicated to explain. Lists, that's what I will talk about today. Index also again, and a delimiter, which you can configure as you please. And collection, also an item. We'll see the code. Oh, we are going to first go to lists. I forgot about that. Lists, yes. A list is simpler than an array. You can just store information directly in a list. It is essentially just a string way of storing the variable, but with the loop system you can go through the items stored in a list very quickly. So a list is a way to store a number of items in a variable, using a delimiter to separate the different items in the list. And this delimiter can be anything really. It could be a space, it could be a comma, it should be a double colon, or well, anything really. It could be an exclamation mark. If you don't use an exclamation mark in your items, then of course. So here you have and cfloop can use a delimiter to find the different items in your list. A string list. Here I have an item list, and I put in like different items with spaces here. So here I should not use a space as a delimiter, because it would just give me item and 1 and item and then it's comma and item and 2, right? But here I would use a comma for the delimiter. So item 1 is an item 2 is an item 3 is an item, and so on. A numerical list. Here you have a numerical list. You can also store numbers. Here it would also be a comma as a delimiter, so I could get 1 out, 2 out, 3 out, 4 out, etc. I made the names a little bit more like logical, like var ID list, var item list, right? So let's look at the actual loop system. Here we have a very simple loop, and I'm actually already sharing the code inside the presentation, but we will also look at it, of course, soon on the code. Simple loop 1 to 5. Simple loop 1 to 5. Index is I. Identifier or index. Could write here index as well. It's just a name. It's a variable name. From 1 to 5, and I think I forgot here the step, actually, thinking about it. I think there should be here step is 1. And then the output inside this loop, so he will go through it. If I don't do step, I think it will just go endless. Or it would just throw an error, actually. And then I output it here with a comma behind it. So you get here like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So it says also here will print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Did you notice that I have a comma here behind it? That's because there's a comma behind here. So always print those nicely that way. If you want to prevent that, you would have to use the cf statements from last lesson, and check for whether it's the last item of the list, and then not display the comma, for example, or check for that it isn't the last item so that you can always display it. That would be the easy way. A conditional loop. They are a little bit more advanced. It takes in a variable, in this case, to check for as a condition. and this variable is myvar, and myvar is false. So this loop here, and I'll skip over this one for a moment, this loop here has a condition of myvar, that is this one, equals false. So as long as myvar is false, this loop will just keep on looping and looping and looping and looping. As this one has no way of showing on which step I am, I had to make a variable of I, basically index, made it here as 0. And inside the loop, the first thing I do is I add one value of 1 to the I. I is I plus 1, which updates the I to 1. And the next time it goes through, I is 1 here, and it updates, so I is 1, I is I plus 1, I 1 plus 1 is 2. So in other words, every time we go through this loop, it will update a number here. So here in the output, I wrote down myvar is currently I, which is 1 at the first row, first time when it goes through. And then myvar, which is false, and it says still in loop. And to make sure that the loop doesn't go forever, I put on here if I, the index here, equals 10, we will set it to true. So myvar is true, and then this save loop will stop. So after this has run, it will stop. It will go back here again to the end of the loop and it goes back to the beginning. Myvar is true, and it will not go forward anymore. But it will have to go for 10 times. And it will actually still print for number 10 because I'm printing before I'm setting my variable. So it will still say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Still a loop. And then after the loop, I put another myvar statement out there that myvar is then true, and basically could be 11, and not really because it's not a loop anymore. So then the loop has finished. I think it's rather complicated, but you will see how it works when I put it out there. What you would use it for? I'm not sure. I haven't actually used it ever before. I've never used it, but I'm sure there is ways you could use it for, like checking for something to be happening, or a process, for example, a process that is running in the background and you're just waiting for it to complete. So this will update this status several times, like pinging to a place, for example, and when it then finally is completed, the database will say, hey, it's completed, and then like myvar is completed, for example, and then it will stop looping and it will say the operation has been completed. That's what I could use it for. I have never used it for anything, actually. So yeah. Conditional loops. But conditional loops stay looping until the condition changes. Other loop types: query, file, array, and struct. I could go on with the other types, but I actually haven't taught you anything of query, file, manipulation, arrays, or structs yet. I feel it's a little bit wrong to throw you on those things, but they're essentially the same. It's like you have a query and you give the query to the loop, and you say loop output cfloop is a query is, and then the query name, and you output through the query. And file has then also again for file. Actually, nothing there. I wonder if there is another field there. There must be a file field, to be honest, or at least a variable field. I bet actually that is already. I'm gonna check it up. cfloop file. This is the the website of Adobe itself. I'm actually using Lucee for my hosting. See, cfloop actually takes a file, and it is the absolute path of a file name. So file takes also the file name itself, and the optional is the delimiter. Back to here, file. Yeah. So cfloop file requires the file attribute, and it would go to file name, a physical path to a file name, so it can read the file out, and basically could read from anywhere as long as the user of ColdFusion on the server has access to it. And if it's a protected one, I would say it would be only in your HTTP route. But yeah, anyway. Arrays, I will have to look into that some other day with you, and struct the same thing, but you can use them as well. And well, I will show you the query one because we'll talk about it next week anyway. So a query, in a short introduction, I suppose. Queries are actions on a database table. So you could select a certain amount of records from a table, from a database, and that would be the result, will be stored in a query. I'm not showing you how a query is built up yet, that I will show you next time, but I can show you here then at least how a query would be part of an attribute of a cfloop statement, where you could, query name, you output the query, and then you could use the query name and the field name to output several records and fields of a table. And then there's an optional start row attribute to that one as well, which means that you can start from a certain row in the table. Not so much used either, really, except for places where you would have to nest certain amounts of fields from a database. Like I use it only for nesting a table full of photos from my photo album that I want to display in 3 columns or 4 columns. Like YouTube, you know, YouTube is also like, or Instagram, but YouTube has also like 3 or 4 videos in columns and several rows down when you go into the browse page, and that's what you see. Then that's where you can use it for. That was our sheet, so that means that I have to actually show you the code now. There you go. I already wrote a lot of lots. Before I start on that, I'm going to show you that I have updated the looks of this page, although it still looks like crap, really. No color whatsoever, or design or anything, but it is, has a little bit of CSS now. You can see the whole overview, but I also have added a download button to every tutorial, so you can actually download the zip file of that tutorial. You can actually try out the code yourself and play around with it. If you have a ColdFusion server or anything local running, you can download Lucee, I think, local on Windows and run it. Or you could go advanced and have a VPS like I have. And here's lesson 3 loops, which I have not created yet, so there's nothing behind it yet, will just give you an error. So the code, let's see. ColdFusion tutorial lesson 3, Stephen. 3, yes, correct. So here you see a little bit of the style sheet code now. Lesson 3, loops and list. Welcome to lesson 3. First of all, let me show you what a list looks like. A list is, like the name implies, a list of items separated by a certain delimiter. The most common delimiter is a comma. We treat them basically the same way as a string of text, but are comma separating each item in a list, which I explained before. We can use a string-based we can use a string-based list item 1. Actually, we should have spaces there for the heck of being able to read it properly. Because spaces are not will go within this one, so you will have a whole list item 1, list item 2, etc. So let's store that that way in that string. Or a numerical based list with all the numbers. And it could be any number in any order, of course, but this is just the way I store it now. The comma here is the delimiter, and it separates between the different items. It could have been any other character that separates from other items, as long as that item or that character is not used in your list, because else you will get things like, oh, my list broke. Yeah, I have that kind of mistake before done. Yeah. So here we can see cfset my first list, list item 1, list item 2, list item 3, list item 4, list item 5. It's basically just a string with a comma separated list of items. And then we have cfloop, and it's so nice with my Visual Studio Code that I can, and the plugin that I installed for ColdFusion, I can actually see all of the things that you can do with a cfloop. Different items are required based on loop type. Items listed as required may not be depending on your loop type. Loop forms, query, condition, index from, to, etc. etc. So we have used here the cfloop list attribute. What does it say in here? The list attribute is used with the index or item in Lucee or CF 2016 plus. Attribute to loop over list variable or file name contains a list. Yes. So as it is a variable, we have to use the pound signs again, or the hashtag signs, or the pound sign actually is the name. My first list is my list here. Item, this is an identifier to use to output it. And delimiter, you don't really have to measure. I think the comma is like a standard if you don't mention delimiters. But yeah, I write it here anyway for your viewing pleasure. And then output, and then we can output the item here, this one. I could have named this basically also like, I don't know, like Steven, right? And then or Smallbringer. Smallbringer, same thing. I could have named it Smallbringer, and then I would have to use Smallbringer here. Variable. Anyway, so that is the variable name, and it will be outputted here. So what will this do? It will output list item 1, list item 2, list item 3, list item 4, list item 5. I didn't put any, I put only a space behind it, no commas. I put a comma behind here, they don't have commas, of course, in there. Because everything HTML that you write in the output will still also, or in the list will also output there. So yeah, you could output a from two lists, like from 1 to 5, iterated from 1 to 5, and then 5 times write your name on the screen. So that's also possible with a cfloop. And what I use cfloop often for is like storing several bits of information several times. That I use loops most for. And then we can also get onwards with the numbers. I think we're just gonna save this code, upload it, and show it. Here follows the output of a string-based list: list item 1, list item 2, list item 3, list item 4, list item 5. And that's correct. So that's what it did. Exactly like we wanted. So now we go to the number-based list loop. List loop. Oof. So yeah, I commented it out for a moment. That is the number-based list. Yes. And then we do the rest later. So here, same story again. A list, a number-based list. Here I used space as a delimiter. So no commas here. See, there's a space between every number. And again, the same story of the list way, and I used a space just by typing a space. as a delimiter. And then output is an item. That's the name item again. So I use the spaces delimiter. Item stores the name of the variable to output the items with and show them with a comma in the displaying items. Yeah, because I put a comma here, so you will have a comma in the output. 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. It will also have a comma after 10 because, well, it outputs it there. That was sort of my problem really with this. We're gonna fix that though soon, because this is actually a list that I can fix. I cannot do that with a 1 to 5 step plus 1 type of list, but I can do that with a list that actually is stored in a variable. So how does that look? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. As you can see, with spaces. Yeah, with spaces. So I made my prediction wrong because I actually put a space in between. Didn't I? Didn't I? Huh. That's interesting. How come there's space? There shouldn't be a space. Huh. Have I come across a bug now? This is very interesting. I can probably fix that with a function. We haven't really gone into functions that much yet, except for last lesson. But I could maybe trim this. Maybe that will help. Trim is removing trailing spaces in a of a variable. Quite handy. How does it look? No, that didn't help. Huh. That is buggy in a way. Because I didn't put a space in there. I didn't put a space in there. So even though it picks up the items from the spaced list, or the not comma separated but a spaced separated list, it still outputs the space somehow in there. And it doesn't make any sense to me right now why it is happening, because I'm not putting any space in here, unless it's taking this space with, which would be very bad. That could be the reason, actually. That could be the reason. That could be the reason that it's taking a space there, because I put a space here. Haha. No. Now, there we go. So apparently it takes the spaces or the enters that I took with in the cfloop. Here, I had like this, right? I had it nicely spaced out like you would normally do with code, but somehow it took the space with there. So if I remove all the spaces and I put all of the code next to each other, no spaces whatsoever, no enters, no hard returns, now it works. As you see now, and there's no more space. But there is still a trailing comma, because after the 10th item we still print the comma. How can we prevent this? Now we're going a little bit back on what we learned in the previous lesson, lesson 2, on cf statements. I can use that here as well. Use a cf statement to remove the comma, to make it nicer, right? That's what we always are trying to do in these coding challenges. You can use a cf statement here, and then we can check whether the current we would have to have an index for it though, wouldn't we? Is there such thing as index? Can we just try that out? like index. Index is an I. Does it work? Let's first try it out, right? Index is I. And then we have to output it I as well. I. And don't leave code behind, so that's also very good idea. Most errors that programmers make is usually in forgetting a cfif or closing a cfif or closing any tag in ColdFusion or any language for that matter. Forgetting to close something is very common. And well, if you read very complicated code after a while with like hundreds of ifs and nested ifs, then it is logical that it happens. But that happened just now as well. Oh yeah, it actually has an index, so I can actually see the current item. Of course, you get down here like 1, 2, 3, double, etc. But if I would have like stored, let's just do that. Let's store like 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 110. Just random numbers, doesn't really matter. Now it should store, and I should probably separate it a little bit, like ID, ID is, or yeah, what is it? Index is, item is. Just to make it a little bit more readable. Index is 1, item is 10. Index is 2, item is 12. Index is 3, item is 13. Index is 4, item is 14. See what I did there? Index is 10, item is 110. I will copy, yeah, make it separate examples, else you'll not see my different types of code anymore. But now you see a little bit how this works. So I can check for this index, which is I. And when it is 10, I could make sure that the comma doesn't get displayed anymore. So that we get a list without the comma on the end of the list output. Back to the code. I will just make a quick copy of this one. 8, and I'm so happy that Visual Code Studio makes the closing tag in one go. It saves me so much work. 9, sorry. Not 90, 9. And then here 10, which is the last one, right? And then it will make sure this one is gonna disappear. Now I've at least fixed that one example there. And here we're gonna use a if statement on before the comma, cfif I, the index, which is 1 at the first time of the loop, and 10 is what we are actually going for. cfif I equals, and I could say 10, and then I don't display this thing, right? So yeah, which means that I would have to write a cfl statement for when there should be a comma. But this is not dynamic, because if I would have more items in that list, then it wouldn't be 10. Right? I'm also doing it in the wrong place here, I see. Hello. Wake up. Would have to do it there. But so you can also do not equals, which is is not the same, or not equals, or not equals, or not is not, basically. I don't think it is not, it is not is in a way. I usually use any Q, which is just very short and easy that way. You can also write it in small letters, but I generally write them in capital ones for some reason. I guess just to make this code look nice. So cfif not equals. Wait. Cfif I not equals 10, we would say here then. If it's not equals 10, I will display a comma. And that would work. This works. It's just that it's not dynamic. So we have different examples now. Displaying them. Right. Back to the normal example. 10. Item is 10. Index is 10. Comma is gone. But this is not dynamic, because if I make the list bigger, it will not be correct anymore. So 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, for example. So the comma stopped after 10, but 11 has a comma again, 12 has a comma again, see? And now 15 also has a comma. So now it's not, no, it's not working. So we have to make it dynamic. So there we use a function again. So instead of not equals 10, there is this thing called list len. And list len takes the list and the delimiter, and will determine the number of elements in the list, as it says here. Determines the number of elements in the list. So list len, and to make it nice, you should probably capitalize that one. List len, the list name, which is my first list. I just made sure that all the lists also are unique named. My first list 1, 2, 3. In functions, you never have an attribute name fully typed out. The attributes, like in the list len, you have the delimiters attributes, is just straight away in hyphens the string or a variable name. In this case, after the list value, comma, and then the space in hyphens. So that should work straight away. Let's check it out, and it works. So now it says 15 everywhere. You see, I had to show that it works before I go and do if statements with you again. So now it works. So I can remove this code. Or I can leave it be. It's fine. So here we can again the cfif I not equals list len my first list number 3, which is example 3 or 4 or whatever, and then the space in hyphens, and that should do it. And then if it's not equals the end of the list basically, then we print a comma and else nothing, right? Else nothing. And that should just do it. So let's just see here. Now the comma is still here. Refresh, gone, comma. So the comma will disappear when the list current indexes, or rather, yeah, the current index, which is here, the current index number is 15, and the total length is 15. So if it's 15 and 15, it will remove the comma. Let's copy this one more time just to show you that even if the actual values of the several IDs that I'm using here are completely different, higher numbers, and it will still work that way. Numerical list items with higher numbers. So 115, 114, 113, or 1113. 212 and 311 and 110 and 109 and 806 and 767 and 676 and 59 and 34 and 32 and 211 and 1111. On a fantastic list of numbers, completely random. This is number 4, the example 4. So let's update all those as well. Everywhere where you put this list name, then you have to put everywhere an update. So with all the numbers updated and the variable name updated, let's look how that is looking like on the code. And there we go. There's still 15 items. You see the item, the first item, the second item, and so on. And after the 15th item, which is 115, no more comma. So that works fine. The simple loop, which I completely forgot about actually to show you, but yeah, I cannot use this trick though then on those, but I can show you it. Actually, I put it in here. Simple loop from, to, and index. Let's first dive into the examples and I present it. First dive, we dove in the other ones first. Simple loop from 1 to 5. So cfloop from 1 to 5, index is I. And I, in this case, index is the current number we are at. And it should also have a step, I think. Oh, step is 1. And then output, and we output the number. You can also use the comma away, but whatever. So how does that look like in the code? And I want just to once again take the other stuff away on our plate. And I got an error. I'm a pro coder. Concasts one string to a number value. What? What? No, that doesn't make sense. Oh, I see. This has to do with how things are copied here. Okay, redo that scene. So here's a simple loop from to an index. From is 1, 2 is 5, index is I, and step is 1. I will show you what step can do more. And then we output the index I here to show here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as you see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 works fine. What more can you do with this? Well, you can also just put text there if you want to put text 100 times on the screen. Like we can copy this code and then we make a simple loop from 1 to 10, printing small bringer. So let me say like, well, 2 is 10, step is 1, and then we just write here small bringer. And we put the index there so you can see how it works, and I put a breaking line behind it. And what will that do? Now, let's see. Weep. And there we go. Small bringer 1, small bringer 2, small bringer 3, small bringer 4. Sorry, but yeah. There you go, that works. You can put like hundreds of texts down. You can also make an unending loop if you're unlucky and crash the server. One more thing I want to show you with this is that you can also put the step on, like, for example, I don't know, 3. It's gonna be wrong here with 10. Step is 2. So then it will be printed, what do you think, 5 times? I think so. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Yeah, step 1, step 3, step 5, step 7, step 9. Yeah, at 10 it's done. That's actually funny. Yeah, but it's also right, because it starts as 1, plus 2 is 3, plus 2 is 5, plus 2 is 7, plus 2 is 9. And then plus 2 is 11, so then it will not run anymore. So then we come down to conditional loop. That was the other thing that we spoke about, but I really have never used it. Apart from this example then today, I've never used that. I think I tried it out, I'm not sure anymore now. Yeah, I did try it out. So this actually works. So here we go. You have seen this code before, but my var is false. This is the condition. If we change my var value is to true or anything else, then it will most likely not work anymore, not run anymore in the loop. So here we set an index is 0, we loop and we set the condition, and the condition is my var equals false. So as long as my var equals false, it will be running this loop. If you set my var to something else than false, whether that is true or small bringer, it will not run anymore because it's not false anymore. Right? We count within the loop. We add a value here. This is easy way of counting, incrementing values, so we don't go endless in this whole story. Can also work in this kind of loop. For a number of purposes. I mean, for that matter, I could say here like condition I is. I mean, that is where I would use it for, really, condition. If I would, but I've never used it that way. That's strange, isn't it? But I could write this as condition as long as I less than 10. As long as I is less than 10, oh, there's 0 here. As long as condition I is less than 10, lt less than 10, it will run. That could possibly also work. We can try it out afterwards, right? I'm just making the comment now. So output my var, and then we show it on the screen, still in loop, and if it's 10, then we set the my var to something else, and so now it's not anymore false, now it's basically true or a small bringer. And then it will stop running the loop. And then we place a my var is what is the value now of my var, and now is the loop is finished. So that will not, yeah, and it will not display true anymore, it will actually display small bringer now there. Updated the code with that information. There you see. I made it, by the way, strong, bold. You can basically better see the values. 1 false, 2 false, 3 false, 4 false, etc. 10 false, and then after the 10 false, my var small bringer loop has finished. Can we do that with the I as well? Let's see if we can get it to work. Just copy this whole thing and then put some breaking spaces in here. I could use paragraphs, but I do dirty coding. We don't need my var, we actually just need I is 0. Loop condition is not anymore that one, but we use that one there. Condition I less than 10, we set the value here, so we make it 1 here already. We output, we remove the myvar, we're not using myvar now, we're using just I. Still on loop. We don't need to do this either. We just need to set the I, increment the value of the I, so that it becomes 10, and as soon as it becomes 10, it will be not less anymore, and then it's equals, right? So at 10 it will stop already. So it probably prints only up to 9, I'm guessing. Let's see. I'm basically just guessing now. Let's see what happens. We could also get an error now. It works. Oh yeah, it actually counts till the 10. Yeah, because I set the I at the beginning. Is that logic? Let's see. Logic. So at 9 we go into the loop again. 9 is still less than 10. We set it to 10 in the beginning of the loop. You go through 10. So if you want to fix that, you set the number. I'll make it nice that way. Yeah. You set the number at the end. Oh wait, not in that end. You set it in the end. There. So when you go through 9 becomes 10, and then should stop. So you see, this is also important, where you place this thing before you output or after you output something. And as you see, myvar still in loop is at 9, sets the 9 to 10, then he gets out of the loop, so he doesn't print myvar and 10 still in loop, but it just goes to the last part of the ColdFusion document, which is then showing the myvar is 10. By the way, this is not myvar, this is I should probably update it. So here only I equals and I equals, so that is all I need to do. I don't have an example code here. So now it will say show I is. Oh yeah, now this is then the problem with that again, is that now it will also display I is 0. Because when I'm just in a loop, it is still 0. To solve this, to get just a 1 to 10 loop, you just have to make the beginning value 1. So if I put here 1, I is 1, we'll go 1 is less than 10, yes. Put here 1, put here 1. Then it will increment the value of I, and in the end it will be 10, right? Now it will be at 1, it will stop being in a loop after 9, and 10 is loop is finished. Woo! Now we haven't done the loop types for query, array, struct and file, but that is mainly because we haven't actually discussed what an array, a struct or a file, how to work with these things inside of ColdFusion, nor have we anything done with query. I can show you though, if you have any interest in this, how I am using it. For example, as you might have noticed with the website, it is smallbraingames.com, is actually a system I'm building some easy ColdFusion based games on. And one of my games, actually I use the old tile based games, if you remember them. I'm using tiles which I store in a database, in a table. I store all of the tiles of a map, just like Google Maps in a way works, because they also store tiles, parts, little pictures of satellite imaging data. And every time when you move over the map, you will see all these tiles loading in again, and that is how I created the map system. And these tiles load in columns and in rows. And some maps will have like 10 rows and 10 columns, and just small images that can go next to each other, and some will have only 3 or 4, for example. And very big images, and very dynamic. I can, and the code that I created for it is also dynamic, so it takes the size of the map from the table and then figure out how many columns and rows it needs. I'll first show you how it looks like in the game. Here's a little game that I created. It's far from finished, but it is a very fun project. It is something that I actually stream live on Twitch when I'm streaming, and I'm working on this project. So here you see a map, which is very simple created just in Photoshop, and it shows like a town. It has roads, as you see, and has an exit here, an exit there, and an exit there, and people can walk around in this map. And so I created it with 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. What I'm planning to do is in the near future, when we have most of the code discussed, or most of the learning code story discussed, then I will start a project with you on something like, well, I was thinking maybe a customer relationship system, which is rather complicated if you think about it. In a customer relationship system, you would have all the communication stored of between the business and its customers. They're sending their offers for a new job. All of the orders, all of the communication would be stored with it. All of the customers would be stored in it, and it would have to have access for certain users, maybe a support system even. So it could be a very complicated project. And I was just thinking, I want to start with some sort of examples, so that you don't only just see like, okay, this is how you program something, but also where the heck do I use it for? So that would be very cool actually to start with. So that is actually for this tutorial about loops. The next tutorial will be about queries. Finally we're going into databases and tables. Quite an extensive lesson, a lot of information, a lot of stuff you don't know, maybe some extra stuff, some basic SQL will be there as well, and how to use all of this. So that we will do in the next lesson. And you can find the download to this tutorial both on this website, smallbringergames.com/ColdFusion tutorials. You can download the new lesson. I'll make this work before you see this video. Also, you can find it in the description below. So be sure to like, be sure to subscribe to be up to date, and click the bell for notification. Also, I would love it to hear some comments from you. How do you like my videos? How do you like my tutorial style? Does it actually get you programming? And yeah, if you have any questions about ColdFusion, please leave a comment as well. I'm glad to answer them in the comments below, as well as on my social media. And yeah, and that's it for today, and see you in the next tutorial. Bye!